Whenever I get a gun, I try to find a gun that has all the features already included with it that I look for, whether that be the right grip texture, the correct sights, or maybe an optics cut, or maybe a good trigger, and things of that nature. But sometimes the gun that you're most naturally proficient with doesn't always have all of those upgrades. And for me, the gun that I am naturally most proficient with happens to be a Glock 19. It's not because I'm a Glock fanboy. I just happen to be a fanboy because their stuff works for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So despite what kind of gun you get, the first thing I look at is the grip texture. I look at how well I can hang on to this grip when my hands begin to sweat. Now, some people's hands are more oily than others, or some people's hands are more sweaty than others. Mine tend to sweat when I'm shooting. I need very aggressive texture from the get-go, just so I can know that I'm gonna hang on to that gun and mitigate the recoil properly. Now, from the guns that I've tested, I haven't tested them all, my 3 favorite grip textures from the factory, on one of them is the Arex Delta Gen 2. We'll go over this in a little more detail here in a little bit, but this is a really good gun, especially for the price of around $400. You get modular optic, you get a really good grip texture, you get a really thin gun, and then some of them have extensions on them for more. This has proven to be a really good gun. It's not my favorite gun, but it is a very reliable and awesome gun to have. Another gun that I like that has some of the best texture from the factory is the M&P 2.0. We're gonna go over this one here in a little more detail as well, because I have this one set up for concealed carry as well, and I have a lot of cool little upgrades that I wanna show you on it, but this one has some of the most aggressive texture ever. Some people even complain that the texture is too aggressive, and in which case you take some fine grit sandpaper and kind of knock down those high spots, and it comes out to be perfect. The next gun that has the perfect texture from the factory happens to be Polymer 80 frames. Now this one is the Faxon Firearms, I think Hellfire, and it is serialized, but they did use Polymer 80's frames. Their texture and grip angle has always been perfect for me, and I've loved it ever since the day it came out. Now, a surprising gun that has really good texture and ergonomics from the factory happens to be the Palmetto State Armory Dagger. The texture is perfect, the grip ergonomics and the angle are perfect for me at least. For a $300 gun, these are really hard to beat. I think I have over 2,000 rounds collectively through PSA Daggers, and I think I had one malfunction, but it was a brand new aftermarket mag. So one malfunction and a couple thousand rounds, not too bad. Now, obviously, when the early versions of this came out, some people were having more issues than others, but for me, not too shabby. Another gun that has really impressed me in regards to grip texture right out of the box, or just it's impressed me completely, is the Shadow Systems MR920s. Now this one happens to be the War Poet edition. The only difference is with the War Poet, you get some different slide cuts and you get a red trigger safety tab, and you help support the Warrior Poet Society and John Lovell and the work that they do. I made a video about this about a year or so ago when I first got this gun, and the cool thing about the War Poet is you can get them with the Holosun 507C X2 already included and mounted. And what's cool about that is if you buy it with this gun already mounted, it takes like $100 and something off the price of the Holosun. And what's cool about that is if you buy it already included with the gun, it takes like $100 and something off the price of the Holosun. It does have an amazing texture. It has some of the best thumb grooves right here, just out of the box from the factory. Now, if you notice, I didn't say the Glock had the best grip texture because it doesn't. And so in that case, I have to find an upgrade so that I can hang on to this gun a little bit better when I'm shooting it. There's really only 2 things you can do to get a better grip texture. One's gonna be really cheap and one's gonna be not so cheap. For the cheap versions, you're gonna get something like this. I believe this comes from a company called Handle It Grips. Also, a company called Talon Grips makes these. It's essentially grip tape for your grip. And what's cool about this is you can get these in 2 different flavors. You can get them as a rubberized version, which is the version that I prefer the most, or you can get them as grip tape on a skateboard, which I don't recommend, but some people like them. These add a lot of grip texture to your gun, but sometimes it's not enough. In that case, I opt to get a stipple job. Now this stipple job was done by my friends at Rocket City Stippling. There's a lot of good stipple companies that I recommend. I will have a playlist. I'll put it like up here or something like that, or up here, I don't remember which side it's on. But the downside to stippling a gun is you have to send your gun off and you need to have another gun for you to carry while you wait for this one. And every company has different wait times. Some of them, they can return it in like 4 weeks. Some of them, it's like 3 months. So make sure you research different companies that do stippling, find out what their lead time is, and make sure you have another gun that you can use while you send this guy off. But to me, stippling is far superior than to say some Talon grips, because you can get it customized to be exactly how you want it. You can get your little ledges up here textured so that you get your thumb on the gun to help mitigate recoil. And with these, my hands just stick to them no matter how much they sweat. And I absolutely love a good texture job. Another sneaky way to increase your grip on your gun is to add a mag well. If you follow the first link in the description, I'll have a list of the different mag wells that I like for different platforms that I prefer. But the reason I like mag wells is on this front lip right here. You can get your bottom knuckle there and it pushes your hand higher into the gun. And now it feels like the gun isn't gonna go anywhere. Basically every carry gun that I have, except for this guy, has a magwell on it. So magwells, some kind of grip tape or stippling, that's how I'm gonna improve my grip. That's the first upgrade that I'll do to any carry gun because it's the most important. If I can't hang on to the gun, I can't defend myself. So something you wanna look out for whenever you're getting a magwell is most of these polymer magwells are not that great. So this is an OEM Glock 17 MOS, and this magwell is actually an OEM Glock magwell, and you can actually see the Glock logo right there. Has a couple things going on for it, right? It has like a little lanyard hole right here if that's something you're into. But talking about magwells and how we can improve our grip with them, now because this is on a 17, it's not a big deal. If this was on a 19, it'd be a bigger deal than what it is. But you'll notice a lot of these polymer magwells, they actually pull off the front strap very easily. This is probably the worst magwell I've ever tested in respects to improving your grip. Now, if you're just buying it so you can help do faster reloads and get the magazine in better, that's a different story. But it all depends on how your grip is. Now, if this was on like a 19 size, I guarantee I would take this thing off because my fingers would be pushing it down all the time. But again, they're only like $20. Another polymer magwell that's been very popular over the past couple of years is the Magpul magwells. I don't remember if these are available for Gen 4 or only Gen 3, but this is on a Gen 3 frame. These can kind of do the same thing, but it does require more force. Over time, you can push these down, but I haven't ever had one come off during firing. But the downside to these is if you look at the inside of this magwell, you can see how chewed up the front of it is from doing mag changes. And that won't happen with an aluminum one. Aluminum ones are typically pretty good. This one is from Blacklist Industries. I really like that one. And like I said, I'll have links to all the different ones that I like. This is the Blacklist Industries one, and this thing has been incredibly solid over the past couple of years. For Gen 5s, especially if you have a Gen 5 that has this stupid half moon cutout, they don't do this anymore on their Gen 5 grips, but when they first came out, and these half moons are incredibly sharp. They actually, you'd have to file those down to not cut your finger. You know, Zev Technologies created a magwell. I don't remember the exact name for this, but they created it so it will actually cover up that half moon. And this has been a very solid magwell, but when you start getting into CNC'd magwells, they start costing quite a bit more. They go from about $20 for something polymer up to about $100, $120 for something CNC'd. So keep that in mind, but you do get what you pay for. Now there is one polymer magwell that has completely impressed me, and it came with my Shadow Systems MR920. It does come with a polymer magwell, but it does not come off of the front strap. In addition to that, I've ran this thing through classes, and the way they've beveled it, it doesn't get all marred up when you're doing reloads over time. And I guarantee I've done a lot more reloads in this gun than I have in this one that's all chewed up. Next is gonna be sights. Now, I don't get super snobby with sights. You know, in the old days, I kind of like the U-shaped rear sight and a bright orange front sight, but I've gotten away from that because I found it more difficult to center the front sight in a U-notch versus a standard squared off notch. Now for any Glock, I'm gonna upgrade the sights. Usually I'll upgrade to some Ameriglow sights, and depending if I'm running a red dot or not, I will get suppressor height sights or I'll get standard height sights. For all of my concealed carry setups, I try to run a red dot with suppressor height sights. And so that way, if my dot happens to go dead or it stops working, the sights are tall enough so I can still align them through the window of this red dot. Now, if my window gets shattered and I can't see through it, At which point I'm gonna use the edges of this red dot to align my sights. You know, you can use the corners of your red dot, all kinds of stuff. You can use the top of your slide. I've shot guns with no sights on them and hit steel at 50 feet away, no problem. You'd be surprised at how well you can actually shoot without sights. As of right now, these are my favorite sights, and they happen to come with the War Poet. As I mentioned earlier, I used to prefer sights that had a U-notch on the back, and then I realized over time that I'm better with a squared off notch. And I always preferred having an orange front sight, and maybe my eyes have changed over the past 6 years, but now I'm starting to prefer this highlighter yellow color / green, depending on how you look at it. A couple of the reasons why I like these particular sights, I'll make sure to have links over at the parts list for you. One of the reasons I like these is when you're looking through it, because the dot is yellowish green, you're not gonna confuse your front sight with the red dot. Now, if you had a green dot, you'd probably want to have an orange front sight. That way, when you're scared, if you have to defend yourself, you're not going to confuse the two. I've never confused the two, but I'm sure anything can happen. Since we're talking about sights, I try to throw a red dot on every single gun that I shoot. I'm not going to get into the details or the weeds on red dots right now, but I did just publish a video not too long ago about some of my favorite red dots and why I choose them. I'll put that video down in the description, as well as another video on the best way to mount red dots to different slides, because not all mounting is created equal. But I like red dots because when you are scared, if you've ever taken a training class and they try to put stress on you, you won't be looking at that front sight. And the only way to really be effective with irons is to be focused on the front sight. So you get a red dot, you superimpose the dot over your threat, and you pull the trigger. So the sights are the same as the grip, right? I couldn't hang on to the gun, I can't hit my target. Well, if I can't get my sights on the target, I also can't hit my target. So that's why grip is first, sights and red dot are second. Now let's move into triggers. And we're gonna spend a little time on triggers because triggers can be kind of intricate. And over the course of this channel in the past 6 years, I can't even tell you how many different triggers I've tested on handguns, but I've tested a lot. Some of them were fantastic and some of them weren't. And I want to kind of go through the gambit and show you what I look for in an aftermarket trigger. And that way you can kind of make your best decision on what you would like to choose. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about triggers because I think whenever you're going to upgrade a carry gun, the most care needs to be taken when you're going to start choosing triggers. Some of these considerations, you got to think about what state you're in because every state has different laws. I don't know the states. I don't know the laws of all the different 50 states in America, but there are certain triggers that I would say would hold up better in some kind of lawsuit if you were in a justified self-defense case. A lot of people worry about a DA saying, trying to prosecute you saying, hey, he upgraded the trigger, so it'd make it easier for him to take someone out. We'll cover that in a little more detail in a minute, but I wanted to just bring up a couple of triggers. First two triggers that I would trust my life with are gonna be from Overwatch Precision, which is these two, and this one here, and Apex Tactical, which is from this one here. Reason I say that, and this might not be the case in every state, but in my state, I don't know if every department is allowed, but I know that Phoenix PD is allowed to carry Apex or Overwatch Precision because these two companies take a lot of care in ensuring drop safes and ensuring that the trigger isn't too light. People like Apex, when it comes to another trigger I'll show you, they have different ways to make the trigger lighter or heavier depending on what your use is. Now for me personally, I don't want to carry anything that has less than a 4-pound pull weight. I find 4 pounds for me to be the best pull weight, when you're nervous and you're shooting. As an example, I have the Timney trigger here for the Glock, and this has been a game-changing trigger. If you haven't seen the video on this, I will link it in the description, but this is a game-changing trigger. Like, they completely redesigned Glock triggers and how they work. And it's one of the lightest, smoothest triggers I've ever fired before. So first, we're gonna talk about Apex. Why do I like Apex triggers? To understand why I like Apex triggers, we gotta look at the stock Glock trigger. This is a Gen 5 trigger, and I will say this, the trigger pull on the Gen 5 triggers is miles ahead of Gen 3 and Gen 4. In fact, in my safe, this is the only generation of Glocks where I'm okay leaving the stock trigger in it and using it in self-defense. And the reason is, the majority of Glock triggers are very hard to pull. Like, you got that first stage to the wall, and then it would be mushy. And these are more crisp than the previous generations of Glocks. And they pull usually right around 4.5 to 5 pounds, which is about a pound or so lower than previous generations. So let's test that real fast. I think this is about a 4.5 to 5 pound pull. Just kind of have to hold this because this thing likes to move. I'm not gonna help the trigger. Right there, 4.5 on the nose. Not too bad, right? But the thing I don't like about this trigger is I don't like how the front of this trigger shoe is curved, and I don't like how when you depress the safety that it doesn't completely disappear. It kind of will create a blister and then callus on your trigger finger over time. And that's okay, you can just, if you're cool with building calluses up, that's all cool. The thing I like about Apex, and it's easier to see on this red one, is now the trigger shoe is flat, okay? The front is not radiused and curved. I like the fact that this blade completely disappears. And then I like the shape of this trigger face. It's kind of flat, but it has a little hook at the bottom, and it's almost like it gives your finger a hug. So you have your take up, break. It's not the cleanest break in the world, but it's miles ahead of OEM, just in the way that it feels. I don't have a safety tab digging into my finger. There's your reset, and there's your break. On this gun here, this is my 17X. I have an Apex trigger in it. You got your take up, got your break. Not the best reset in the world, I will admit that. And I think that's because this frame's Cerakoted. But nonetheless, I like Apex triggers. Now, where Apex, I would say, really shines is in their M&P line. I don't have an M&P with an OEM trigger in it to show you the difference. But if you've ever seen an M&P trigger, it has this hook style trigger with the hinge, and I can show you the hinge in a second on a different trigger, but they made this, which is a striker fire gun, closest to a 1911 that I've ever seen in my life. And let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, here I just have a basic Rock Island Armory 1911. These are hands down probably the best triggers in the world on a handgun. You see there's very little take up, very little travel, very lightweight. And then here's your reset. Okay, notice how it moves straight back. There's no hinge to these triggers. And so whenever we upgrade our striker fire handguns, we know we can't make them exactly like a 1911 because they are gonna be on a hinge, but we can do everything we can to make them as close to a 1911 as humanly possible. And that's what Apex did with the M&P. You'll see here we have our take up. It's just slop. There's no real resistance here. That's what you take up to get to your wall. The break, reset, break, reset, break. But interestingly enough, for years, Apex was the only company to make aftermarket triggers for the M&P line, 2.0, 1.0, what have you. And they've recently introduced this guy, which is their polymer shoe version. So before they had a CNC trigger shoe. And you know, for Glocks, they were about $120, but that came with a connector, trigger bar, trigger shoe, all that stuff. And then for the M&P, there's a lot of different springs and stuff, so you can configure it to be 6 pounds all the way down to about less than 3 pounds, depending on what your application is. And so because these were so much more intricate, they were like $180, $160, something like that. But now that they've introduced the polymer shoe version, you can get these now for as low as like $100. I think I'll have some codes for them, but with codes and stuff, you can get these for down like $100 now. And the only difference is you get a polymer shoe. And in my testing, the polymer shoe is just as effective as the CNC'd aluminum shoe. Now we're gonna talk about somebody who I've just recently started testing their guns with. About a year or so ago, they came out with this guy here called the Timney Alpha trigger. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, they redesigned the way that these triggers work. What they did to this trigger is kind of the same difference that Apex did to the M&P trigger. They've radically changed it. I have a video that goes into more detail about it, so I'll link it down below, but they've changed the way the trigger works, so they maintain all the safeties. You don't gotta swap out springs, but at the same time, you can get a trigger pull weight down to like 2 pounds if you want. So that is at 3 pounds exactly. It's a little bit too light for me to want to carry it, I'll be real with you. So I would not carry this. Now, I know that Johnny Glocks, he's a good friend of mine. He has some kits and he does some work on these triggers to make them better for concealed carry and stuff like that. But this is an amazing trigger. I absolutely love it. My only gripe with these is they have weak reset. But I will say Timney has came out with some return springs that make it a little bit of a better reset. And something else you'll notice is Glock triggers, when you pull them, they stay to the rear. With these, when you pull them, they go right back, just like an M&P trigger. So that's something that's very different. Now, another new trigger they just came out with, which I find is interesting, is they now have M&P triggers. And their trigger actually maintains the hinged design of the factory trigger, which is strange, I thought. You just grab this trigger, breaks, resets. Let's see what that pulls at. Okay, so that was a hair over 3 pounds. Now, at least in the one that I have, it functioned flawlessly when I was at the range, but the feel of it wasn't as good, I don't think, as the Apex. And what I mean by that is the break, there's clunkiness to it. So you got a clunk when you get the trigger straight, then you got a clunk when you get to the wall, then you got a clunk when you break it. So there's 1, 2, 3 clunks in the trigger pull. And you don't notice it when you're shooting fast, but I felt like I couldn't shoot this one as fast at the same accuracy level as I could something from Apex. Now the Apex, if you notice, 1 clunk, 2 clunks. So it's just a preference thing. I'm not gonna say that this trigger is bad because it performs phenomenally well. I just prefer 2 clunks to 3 clunks. So let's talk about Overwatch Precision for a minute. So Overwatch Precision has made Glock triggers for a very long time. This is the Faxon Firearms Hellcat, and their triggers are included with it. The thing that Overwatch does that nobody else does is they do MP3 coatings on their connectors and on their trigger bars, which give it a more natural lubricity without the addition of additional lube. So it makes the trigger, you know, take up and reset and break and all that stuff just a little bit easier. But they don't lighten it to the point where it would be dangerous for carrying it. So you got your take up, break, reset, break. Okay, what's that pull at? That has to be 4.5 to 5, but we will see. Just a hair under 4.5 pounds. Getting pretty good at this, guessing trigger weights. Now the cool thing is, I'm assuming that the patent on this trigger from Apex has expired because we got Timney making triggers for the M&P now, and Overwatch Precision is now making triggers for the M&P. And this is a very interesting trigger. Take up, break. Let's look at the Apex again. Take up, break, reset, break. I like the reset on the Apex trigger better, but I like the overall feel and the way that this trigger pulls and how far it takes to break better on the Overwatch Precision. Very fascinating indeed. Now another trigger, I wouldn't say to carry this trigger per se, but it is good if it's for a range toy, or maybe you want to go out and compete with it, and it is a safe trigger. It's from a buddy from Tactical Pontoon. This is called the Leonidas trigger. I just got this, so you know, keep that in mind, but I mean, it's at the wall. And then there's the break, and there's the reset. Now, I love this trigger. I don't have enough rounds behind it to say that I would carry it yet, but I just wanted to show you that, and I'll have a link over at the parts list, but at the wall, break. Now, I have been testing the drop safe on this, and the way I do that is I find a carpeted room, I make sure this is empty, and I slam this against the floor to try to get that to break, and I can't get it to break. Another trigger that Overwatch Precision has come out with as of recently is the Walther PDP trigger. Now there's a bunch of triggers available for the Walther PDP apparently. I think there's some from Walther themselves. And I believe that Apex might have one, not really sure. But I got it for this one, and I like it much better than the stock trigger. Now, the stock trigger on the PDP is actually really good. However, I didn't care for the lack of reset on it. Some people say they don't mind not having an audible and tactile reset, but I did. But this feels absolutely amazing. I gotta get a stipple job for this gun. I can't hang on to it very good with this texture. It looks aggressive, but when you start sweating, don't let it fool you. It gets slippery. Let's see what the pull weight is on this guy. All right, that one pulled just a hair over 4 pounds. Definitely carry worthy. Another trigger they just came out with, and this is very first trigger that was available for the longest time, was from a company called HBI Industries. And I have a previous video about that trigger, and that trigger was pretty good. But then all of a sudden, Apex Tactical now has one. I haven't tested it yet, I'm sure it's great. Then Overwatch Precision has one, and it feels amazing. Now, the CZ-P10C has a great trigger from the factory, but I just don't like how sharp it is when I press it. But this one is amazing. And I'm sure the Apex is also, but I just haven't tested it yet. And this one's pulling at about, that one's pulling at about 3.6 pounds, 3.5 pounds, something like that. But what's strange is, although it pulls at that weight, I like the way the wall feels. So when I press out, I don't feel like I'm gonna pull the trigger accidentally when I'm prepping the trigger. So that's a good thing. For a light trigger, this is one that I would actually carry with. So now let's talk about what are the main things we need to know about Apex versus Timney versus Overwatch Precision. I would say that either one of these triggers is gonna be perfect for carry. I would not carry that one personally. It's just a little bit too easy to pull it on accident. I would trust my life with either one of these. It just kind of comes down to what your style is. Both of these are about the same price. You can get, if you choose to get these with the Robar MP3 coating, the price does go up a little bit. And I would trust my life with the MR920 trigger because this is my carry gun now. Now, in regards to the M&Ps, how do you choose which one that you want to get? The Timney trigger, non-adjustable. There's nothing on this trigger that you can configure to make it more your own. You can't change the weight or anything like that. The Overwatch Precision is the same thing. There's no way, they don't come with a ton of different springs and stuff like that, so you can't configure this to be the perfect pull weight. The Apex, on the other hand, comes with a ton of different springs and a chart. So it's like, oh, if you're duty carrying, use these springs, and all the springs are color coded. So this one's more customizable. But the feel, I would say that these two are almost identical. There's just the differences. The reset isn't much difference, but there's minute differences in them. And I would say if you chose to get this one or this one, you really can't go wrong. I would say that this one's easier to install because you don't got to think about the different spring configurations, whereas this one is going to take a little more knowledge when installing it. And I will have install videos in my Custom Glock course, and because it's not going to be just about Glocks, it's going to be about other striker fire guns as well. So I'll have an install video over there. It's not uploaded yet, but it will be. Now, before we move on to the next thing, let's talk a little bit more about triggers. Check your local and state laws. Also check your state to see if there was any lawsuits with people that were involved in a self-defense shooting that may have had an upgraded trigger. But I haven't heard of any cases where someone was in a justified shooting where they were 100% in the right, had to defend their life with their handgun, and had an upgraded trigger and got found guilty. I just haven't heard of one. I've tried researching it, couldn't find anything. But if I'm wrong about that, let me know down in the comments. And if you are gonna tell me I'm wrong about something, make sure you cite your sources. Otherwise, it's just some dude on the internet telling me something. Now, the next upgrade is a light, because a lot of times bad things happen at nighttime. As we said with the sights, if we can't see our target, we can't hit our target. So having a good light is very important. There's a lot of different lights. A lot of people like a lot of things. I happen to like some things and some people don't, but we'll go through the lights and I'm gonna tell you exactly why I like them and why I choose them. There's a lot of crappy lights out there. I'm just gonna be honest with you, especially if you go to Amazon and start looking around. And there's basically three things that I look for in every single light. First is the availability of compatible holsters. You know, I know Olight there for a while was coming out with a ton of handgun lights, and I tested some of them, and in my testing, the ones that I tested worked just fine. The downside that I had with them was finding a holster maker that actually made holsters for it. Now, there were holster makers available, but those holster makers weren't from holster companies that I preferred. I'm not saying they were bad, I just didn't prefer them. I'm not gonna go into it in this video, but the ones I prefer are from Tier 1 Concealed. I will have links over at the parts list if you wanna check these out, and I have a complete video on why I like Tier 1 Concealed. One of the many reasons I like them is they now have this one called the MSP holster, and essentially it will fit any gun that has a Surefire X300 on it, and I actually showed a bunch of different guns in the video when I made the video about this. That is something important to consider if you have like a favorite holster company that you use when you're choosing a light, is you want to choose a light that holster company will support. Now, I tend to stick to about 3 brands of pistol lights, and I haven't tried some of the newer brands like Cloud Defensive and stuff like that. I've heard they're great, but I just haven't tried them yet, so I'm not gonna talk about them. The third thing I look for in a pistol light is the way you turn the light on. As an example, with the Surefire X300 here, you have to push these switches down in order for it to work, or you can push it down on this side, or you can push straight into it to get momentary. That doesn't feel like a natural motion to me from here. When I'm in the firing position, I have to reach way down to actuate this. And then I can turn it off with my trigger finger or what have you. Or if I don't have the use of my support hand, I can at least do that. And that's a pretty decent way to actuate a light. It's not bad, but it's not ideal for me. And because I just conceal carry, I'm not military, I'm not law enforcement, I'm not on duty anywhere. For the longest time, I always preferred in-force lights. Now, they did have some quality issues back in the day, like with what they call phantom battery drain, but I never had that issue with phantom battery drain, and I have a ton of these lights. But the reason I liked them is they had paddles that you pushed inward. And then over here, you could push this side, and I didn't have to reach down as far with my thumb to actuate it. And then if I only had one hand available, it was just there. And I have the majority of my holsters are made for this specific light. Now, there's also an argument to be made for a full-size light that sticks out beyond the muzzle of the gun, and that's because if something pushes on your slide and pushes your slide out of battery, your gun won't fire. And so if the theory is if someone was on top of you fighting you, they could push your gun out of battery and there's nothing you could do. But with a pistol light that sticks out beyond the muzzle, you could actually use that to angle the gun and then pull the trigger. So that's one reason why people like to carry longer lights on smaller guns. But for me, as a concealed carrier, I just always preferred something that fit pretty flush. Unfortunately, Inforce doesn't make these lights anymore. They discontinued them a couple of years ago, and then they took forever to come out with the new ones that I'm gonna show you in a minute. So in the meantime, I started playing with the new Streamlight, TLR7A and TLR7 Sub. This TLR7 Sub, I originally bought this one for my Glock 43 MOS, but I got the wrong mounting system. So you have to get the one that's for Glock, and it wouldn't fit. So I put it on my AREX and it fits perfectly. So I just threw it on there, but I like the way the switches work. One of my biggest complaints with Streamlight TLR, the original TLR7s back in 2018, was they had the most awkward switches. And so thankfully they went back to the drawing board, and now they offer these with different kinds of switches. There's some kits you can get that come with different size switches. You can just swap out this back panel, put a new set of switches on them. These have really high lumens. I don't remember the lumen output off the top of my head. I will annotate that on the screen for you. The Inforce APL-Cs were only 200 lumens, but because I could actuate it and it fit me the best, I didn't care. But the TLR7 Sub has been really good, shot like a dream. Got it on my 43X here. I just need to order a holster for it. Same thing, you just push down with your index finger on this side or down over here. You do kind of have to reach down kind of far, and it does feel awkward, but because I couldn't get APL-Cs anymore, this was a really good alternative. These are the TLR7 Subs. These will fit subcompact guns, but they'll also fit some compact guns as well. So for the 2.0 optics ready, I got the TLR7A. Now, this one's having a problem, and I actually contacted Streamlight about it, and they're supposed to be getting me another light out and doing a warranty replacement. This one has had very little use, and this one is suffering from phantom battery drain. When I got it, I put the factory battery in it, turned it on. About a month later, it was almost dead, and I had only been to the range twice with it, and I didn't even have it on at the range the whole time. So yeah, I got another Streamlight battery, put it in there, and I didn't take it to the range. I just put it in my safe. And then I pulled it out one day, and I was playing with it, and I'm like, huh, why did the light suddenly dim already? Like the battery's almost dead. I'm gonna replace the battery right now. There we go. Now it's nice and bright. So like I said, this one does have to be replaced. Phantom battery drain can happen to any battery company. I don't know, it has to do with something with the connections being a little bit loose. I'm not 100% sure, but just an FYI on that. So recently, probably in the past few months, Inforce finally came out with their updated, one of them's called the Wild 1 and one of them's called the Wild 2. I don't remember which one's which. There's a bunch of things I love about these lights. Their lumen output is far greater than it was before. I will annotate what that is on the screen because I don't remember off the top of my head. They don't look too much different, but I can tell you in a dark room, there is a big difference. And then they get the full-size light, which replaced the standard APL. Downside, the biggest downside to these lights, if you had a holster made for one of the APL-Cs or the APLs, these won't fit. You can see that right here, this light doesn't come all the way down to the bottom of the trigger guard. It's kind of up a little bit. This one comes further down, and therefore they won't fit. But they're still phenomenal lights. I have two of them. I only have a sample size of 2, and I haven't had any phantom battery drain with these or any flicker issues or anything like that. Now that doesn't mean that everybody hasn't had the issue, I just haven't. So I haven't started carrying these yet because I don't have a holster for them, but I would definitely carry with them. So from grip texture to sights, the red dots, to the trigger and the light, those are the top 5 most important things on any carry gun that I ever come across. But there is one more thing that I will upgrade if I think that it's worth it. And that's gonna be an additional way to mitigate recoil. And that's with a compensator. And this happens to be the new Radian Afterburner with ramjet. This is a very fascinating design, and we're gonna go over the results of the recoil impulse here in a minute, but I'm not a stranger to testing compensators and ported barrels on this channel, especially in like the year 2017 all the way to like 2019. I tested a ton of them. And of the ones I tested, I have a couple of rules for compensators for carry guns. Number 1, the compensator must work with range ammo at 115 grains. And the reason I say that is 115 grain range ammo isn't powerful compared to like some self-defense loads. But if the gun can cycle completely and not have any malfunctions with that, it will definitely cycle and compensate the higher plus P pressures and the faster loads. And so it has to run bare minimum with that. My second criteria for a compensator to even be considered for concealed carry, it must work with the OEM recoil spring and guide rod. And that's because in the past, I've finagled with springs before with compensators, and sometimes when you lighten that spring just a little bit, when you let the slide go home, it won't go all the way into battery. And sometimes I'll find my gun just sitting out of battery. So I don't like lightening my guide rod spring at all for a carry gun. And so far, I've had a few that have worked very well for me. One of the first compensators that worked really well for me was this guy right here from Legion Precision. He now makes them a lot smaller. I just don't know where the one is that is smaller, meaning it's a lot closer to the slide. But these work very well. I'm able to run them with OEM springs and 115 grain ammo, but there are a couple of cons to it. Not this one in particular, but this style. Number 1, you gotta have a threaded barrel. And a lot of states outlaw threaded barrels, so we'll talk about how to get around that in a minute. Additionally, you use set screws to hold it in place, and sometimes when this barrel gets really hot and this comp gets really hot, the Loctite on the set screws can weaken and it'll start spinning on you. I've had that happen before. The other downside to compensators of this style is they add extra length. Now, another compensator that works really well, at least on my CZP-10C, is this guy from Primary Machine. It is a little bit on the larger side, but with my Surefire XH35, it's still shorter than the light. This is a very phenomenal gun to shoot, and it works with the OEM spring, and it works with 115 grain ammo. Now, one of my favorite compensators that I'd ever tested before was this guy, and I've have the actual like prototype version. They don't look like this anymore. This comes from a company called Mayhem Syndicate. I made a video for them in the summer of 2017. And what they did was they made a proprietary barrel that has a shortened thread, and then you use a roll pin to drive through it and it locks it on. And what you get is a very short but effective compensator that mitigates recoil very well and also runs with OEM springs and also runs with 115 grain ammo. They have since updated this. There's no longer this S3F Solutions logo on it. They never had that. It's just a prototype. But they've upgraded the locking mechanism, so now there's a detent on it. It's a much easier to take on and off than driving a pin out. But I will say it's a very phenomenal compensator. As I mentioned, I want to try to make my compensator as short as possible. And one way you can do that, and it's a little more difficult with Glocks, but like with P320s, for example, I have a compact slide on a full-size frame, and then this has the Parker Mountain Machine compensator and proprietary barrel, and this almost makes it completely flush with my frame. This will run with an OEM guide rod, but it doesn't run the best, which is why I have it on my P320 X5 Legion, because this is more of a competition gun. This is not a gun I'm gonna carry. I honestly don't really mess with compensators very much for concealed carry. However, there is one other one that I just got, the ramjet, AKA the Afterburner. And this is from Radian Weapons. And to really appreciate this, we gotta look at it up close. This solves quite a few problems that all of these other compensators have. The first problem that all of these compensators have is if you live in a state that doesn't allow threaded barrels, you can't use any of those legally. But this is called the Radian Afterburner and Ramjet. It's a proprietary barrel, proprietary comp, and it fits flush with whatever generation gun you want to get. These will work with the MR920, but you need to get one for Gen 3. And they are available for Gen 3, Gen 4, and Gen 5. And I have a crazy code for these. So the Gen 5 slides have this radius right here, whereas older Glocks are more squared and blocked off. They've made the Gen 5s where they wrap around and they fit perfectly. Now what's cool about this, these are the easiest to install and there's no Loctite to them at all. It comes with a proprietary barrel, and this barrel is not threaded in any way, shape, or form. You will notice the front of it kind of looks like it's triangular, but that's just the outside dimensions. The inner dimension is still perfectly circular. Essentially, put the barrel on, drop that guy on, and then this is the pin that holds it in place. It's a very nice threaded pin, and it uses a Torx bit, so it's really difficult to strip. And it comes with all the tools in the box. I'm just using my own tools right now to make it easier and faster. But this has really impressed me. Let me show you the results of this. So how does this guy actually perform at the range, and did I have any malfunctions with it? We're gonna run through some different weight ammos from 115 grain standard range ammo, 124 grain range ammo, 124 grain NATO, and then I got a couple of carry rounds that we're gonna shoot as well. I don't want to show you all the hundreds of rounds that I put through it, but I never had a single malfunction. As you can see, I tested it with multiple different grains of ammunition. I tested it and I even compared that to not having a comp, and you could see the difference in recoil. And this has by far been one of the most reliable compensators that I've ever tested before. Now, I haven't tested them all. I like that on my Glock 19X, it doesn't add much length to my slide. It basically makes it the same size as a Glock 17 with that little bit added. Now, they do make these for all the different generations, but this thing is pretty phenomenal. I couldn't believe how well it shot for me. Now, with that said, I know that Kit Badger recently released a video on this. I don't know how long ago it was, and I watched that video, and he had a few malfunctions. There's a lot of things that can contribute to malfunctions, like what was the temperature of the weather he was shooting in? What kind of ammo was he using? How much lube did he have on there? Did he have any gunk in his firing pin? All that stuff. So I don't know. And there's not a whole lot of videos about these, but you guys know me. If it's gonna fail, I'm definitely gonna tell you, because it doesn't do anybody any good to censor out products that aren't performing the way that they should. This one has performed 100% flawlessly, and from the test that I put through it, I 100% recommend it. But remember, I have a sample size of 1. The rest of them could be crap and I just don't know about it. But like I said, the compensator is the least of my worries for concealed carry upgrades on a handgun. But if you happen to have a Glock and you do want to help cheat that recoil a little bit and you already have proper grip, this thing is just going to make you a lot faster and a lot more accurate at those fast speeds. Now, the other thing that we need to consider when we do these upgrades is holsters. And so if you want to know more about holsters and how to choose the right one for the upgrades that you have, I recommend that you watch this video right here. I go into all the intricacies of the pros and cons of different types of holsters and what types of upgrades on your gun will work with said holsters. But anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Until next time, I love you. You guys stay sexy.